that's me. Some people, I know you, Richard, you're well, let's just go ahead and introduce.
Yep.
So we have Deacon Seraphim Richard Rohlin on the show, and I'm glad that Seraphim's here. He's one of the rare voices, who can hold both the weight of tradition, and the spark of new creation. So for folks just now meeting you, Seraphim, let's describe what you do in this realm here.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you might know me from the internet. I've gone by my given name online for the last several years. Richard Rohlin, doing podcasts. The weird thing is that I've never gone out and started like the Richard Rohlin podcast.
Right.
I just always do things like this. I have friends who are doing really cool things, and I just try to look for ways to support them and put them forward. So the things that I'm the best known for is that I used to do a Tolkien podcast on ancient faith radio with Father Andrew Stephen Damick, and it was called it is called the Amansul podcast. It's still out there, and we just passed it off to somebody else who's doing a great job with it. And then also, I have a current podcast with Ancient Faith that's also a YouTube show called The Great Tales. So you just look up The Great Tales podcast on YouTube. It is a twice monthly show where Father Andrew Stephen Damick, who I collaborate with frequently, that's where he and we talk about ancient stories, this is kind of my area of specialty. I'm a philologist by training, so it means I'm interested in ancient literature and languages. And so one of the things that's really interesting to me is ancient stories and how they kind of help us actually make sense of the world that we live in today. And that's kind of how I got involved in all of this space to begin with. The other thing that I do, not quite as frequently lately, although later this year we'll be starting it up a little with a little better of a rhythm, is something with my friend Jonathan Pajot, who's also involved now with the promotion of your film. We do something called Universal History on his channel, The Symbolic World, where again, kind of doing this some similar things to what I'm doing on Great Tales podcast, but instead of looking at individual stories quite so much, we look at kind of these larger patterns and how cultures write themselves into the story of Christianity when they convert to Christianity.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's one thing I've always appreciated about your work is it's like you understand what's happening under the surface, like the backstory, right? The lineage, so to say.
Yep. The lore. The kids are saying the word lore now, which
Yeah.
actually makes me really happy because it's a good old Germanic word, lore, which really is, has the same root as the word to learn or learning, but it's fun how people use that word now. So.
Yeah, so you would say that you help people recover the sacramental imagination, I guess. Yeah, can you talk about that? And why do you think, and we both have seen this, why do you think there's this hunger for it right now? Because I became Orthodox 11 years ago, and
just a little before we did.
Yeah, it was it was very it was not represented in the way books or cinema. We could talk about that. But how? Can you talk a little bit about that and why people you think are hungering for that in this day and age?
So, to talk about the basic idea of the sacramental imagination, right? So the imagination, as understood as sort of the connective tissue or the thing that mediates between your senses and then your mind, right? Your intellect. So the imagination is used, and you can really get into this. I don't want to go too much into various certain church fathers, especially monastic fathers, say things about the imagination specifically in the context of prayer. But this certainly isn't to mean that no Christian should ever use their imagination at all. Obviously, we have a really rich imaginative tradition within Orthodoxy in terms of the iconography, our hagiography, our music, all these different things are products of the imagination. If you're going to build a beautiful church building, you have to sit down and first imagine what such a building would look like. It doesn't matter that you have real world examples to go off of. Your imagination still has to be involved in figuring out what would I, what could this look like? What could this temple look like? What could a community look like that lives and worships here, right? You have to imagine those things, and then you start trying to implement it in the world. And so the sacramental imagination is the ability to understand the world, to conceive of yourself as living in a world where material things, where things that you can handle and teach and see and taste and touch, where these things actually have the ability of communicating God's grace to us. So this is what I mean by the sacramental imagination. Of course, the world really works this way. The problem is that we, and this is just sort of downstream of the Protestant Reformation. Actually, I'll just put this out here. Several years ago, Peter Leithart, who is a Protestant author, in kind of in the Reformed tradition, he wrote a 2-part essay, and I think it was published in First Things, but you can go out online and look for it, called "Why Protestants Can't Write." Now, again, he's a Protestant writer, scholar, writer, academic, thinker, pastor, etc. But he wrote something called "Why Protestants Can't Write," and what he did was he connected the kind of the dearth in actually good Christian art to the Reformed Protestant rejection of the goodness of the material world and of its capacity of material things, let's say bread, water, wine, and oil, like the most basic things that we use in our worship of God, that we use to know God. The idea that these things could not be that they're just arbitrary symbols, that they've got no connection at all, that they can't communicate grace. And so that's something that we've all kind of inherited, even if you're not in that tradition. It's an idea that you sort of inherited, and it makes all of us basically functionally materialists. So we do one of two things. One is that we'll say, well, the stuff that is in the material world doesn't really matter. What really matters is the thoughts that you think with your mind. That's what's important. That's your real faith. So this could lead you to saying, well, since we can worship anywhere, which is true, you can worship God anywhere. But since we can worship God anywhere, it doesn't actually matter where we do it or what the building looks like. That's one direction you could go with it. You could also just go and say, well, this material stuff is all there is, and so you end up in this sort of two-story universe. Is a terminology that some people use for it, but this vision of the world where the material and the spiritual are just totally radically separate things that don't really have anything to do with each other. So the things that we do with our body don't matter. The things that we, and the funny thing is that most Christians believe that you can, in fact, go to hell for something you did with your body, right? But they do not believe that anything you do with your body has anything to do with the reverse situation, that you could also be saved by things that are done physically speaking. So the sacramental imagination is my attempt to use art and to help other people see how art can be used. Obviously, it's not a term that's original to me, but to see how art can be used to restore this imaginative capacity where people can start seeing the world as a gift of God, seeing the world as good, and seeing the world as potentially, something that can mediate and communicate God's grace to us. And this finds its place first and foremost in the Christian sacraments, or the mysteries, as we sometimes call them in the Orthodox Church. But baptism, the Eucharist, chrismation, but also marriage, right? Which is also this physical union that you're in with a person over a long period of time for the sake of your salvation as a human person. And so anyway, that's kind of the idea, is that the right kind of stories, the right kind of art can help us recover this capacity, but also developing a sacramental imagination can help us actually tell good stories again. And my belief is that the sacramental theology of the church is fully present in its best form within the Orthodox Church. And therefore, we as Orthodox Christians should be also the best storytellers. Now, there's this weird thing called talent, which God distributes unevenly. And in fact, very often, the people who get the artistic talent tend to be a little, a little weird. Just historically speaking, there's something going on with artists. But so I'm not saying that every Orthodox Christian is going to be like the next, I don't know, J.R.R. Tolkien, or the next great filmmaker or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that within our tradition, we actually do have all the tools, because we've preserved this this way of seeing the world, which Western forms of Christianity have rejected. And the thing is, they know they have, and there are a lot of people that are working on that in other traditions, and that's great. I'm not trying to run any of them down, but I do believe this is the fullness of the faith, and that we have kind of preserved the best understanding of the world and the ways that the world can mediate, communicate God's grace to us. And so something that I'm very excited about is that we do have a kind of so Jonathan Pajot was down here at the Orthodox Arts Festival in North Dallas just a couple of weeks ago, and his keynote talk was called "The Time for Orthodox Art is Now," and I think that's exactly it. Like, this is the time. Let's start making things. And it's not like there's no Orthodox art. I mean, it's just the fact that Orthodoxy is very new in the Anglosphere, like within the Anglosphere, like the English-speaking world. Orthodoxy still has a small missionary presence. One, I would say, culturally punches far above its weight. If you look at the actual number of Orthodox Christians in America, it's quite small. We don't know the exact number, but it's still probably less than 1% of the population. But then very often it seems like, especially lately, Orthodox people are having kind of an outsized influence, especially with Gen Z, especially kind of in this online sphere, the podcasting world, and things like that. So we are kind of punching above our weight, which is awesome. And but I think it's also time. It's time for, obviously, the idea that like Russia or Greece or somewhere has not had art or film or literature or like any art produced by Orthodox people is very silly. It's just that, again, those things are not accessible to most of us living here in America, speaking English as our first language. So it is time to kind of take the some of the Western storytelling traditions, I think, and which is of course is, for instance, I mean, obviously this is what Dostoevsky was doing with the novel, right? Which is fundamentally a Western storytelling medium. Which Dostoevsky took, obviously other authors as well, but and then told these beautiful stories, sometimes terrible stories. I mean, great, but also terrible, but told them in a really authentically Orthodox way. And I think that is what we should be trying to do also with the newer storytelling media. A medium like film, which is relatively new, certainly compared to the Orthodox Church, is basically brand new. But there are also other things out there. People who know me know I'm quite interested in and always working on stuff pertaining to tabletop role-playing games. And this is because I really believe that tabletop gaming is it's a storytelling medium, like film, like the novel. And that there's a tremendous opportunity to do it well. That if we could accomplish that, if we could do it well, it would actually really help us develop the sacramental imagination of our children and also of adults. So anyway, I just talked for a long time. It was
I love that. And so is the hunger for it, for these things, for these tabletop games, for cinema, for different new types of literature, like, is the hunger for that is because of the influx in converts to Orthodoxy? I mean, obviously, or not? Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely got to do with that. It's a sense of, well, now that we're Orthodox, we would like Orthodox things, and so, I mean,
yeah.
So one of the things that I do is I run the Symbolic World Press with Jonathan Pajot. We make fairy tale books, graphic novels, things like this. And a lot of times we have people, we're not marketing to just the Orthodox Christians. We're, I would like everyone to buy our books. Please buy our books. But there definitely, there is a certain kind of person who is just like really wants to know that they're going to have something that's safe, You know, it's like, okay, well, this is produced by Christian people. It's a Christian product, so this will be safe to give my kids. And I have 6 children, so I get it. I'm very sympathetic to that desire. But actually, this is not what I'm the most interested in. For me, it's not just, okay, now we have a bunch of Orthodox converts, let's start making stuff for them. It's kind of the other way around, is to say, we need to start making things for the world. And as people are coming in and they're converting, and we have artists and storytellers, right? And people who have the gifts. Again, there's this thing called talent, which God gives unevenly, distributes unevenly, in a way that's very often has seemed to have very little to do with like the moral quality of the person who receives it. We could talk about the various reasons for this, but when we have people who are coming into the church that have these talents, once they've kind of had enough time to start to absorb the church and the services and the architecture and the beauty of the church, and having their lives transformed by God's transformative grace, then at some point it's time to say, all right, now it's time to give something back to the world. As an evangelistic tool, sure, but also because the war that the world is waging is primarily fought on artistic grounds.
Wow.
And that if we give up these areas and we just decide, well, we're just not going to make movies, or we're just not going to, if you make music. I mean, I'm not just talking about like church music, but like make secular music. Like, if we decide we're not going to do these things, then we've already ceded the territory to the enemy. And that stuff is way upstream, way upstream of politics. That stuff is way upstream of young people leaving the church, right? All that stuff is, the groundwork for the current situation that we're in right now in the United States was laid artistically in like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, right? So decades and decades ago. So that's kind of my pitch for saying, like, the time for Orthodox art is now, and it's not just because we need to make stuff for our people. It's because we have something important and valuable and sanctifying to offer the world, and it's time to just stop being reactionary.
Yeah, it's crazy. I grew up Protestant. My dad is still a traveling evangelist, and making, I made Christian art. I use the quotations, Christian art. There was Christian, I think there was like Christian clothes, and it was very easy to make Christian art. But being Orthodox for 11 years, when I was set out to make this new film, my second feature film, Tonto Por Cristo, the thing that I battled with mentally was, am I Orthodox enough to make this picture? What do you think that is? Why would I have a thought like that? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there to you right now. I
mean, we're converts, and I think there is definitely some, like imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. Anxiety, about this thing that we're doing, Sure. I mean, it's sort of funny. A lot of times when I'm interacting with people online, which I do a lot for as a part of my podcasting work and ancient faith and symbolic world and so on and so forth. And so I interact a lot with people who are outside of the Orthodox Church, but who are interested in what I'm doing, who are people of goodwill, who are other kinds of Christians. Normally these interactions are pleasant. I am, typically speaking, I'm not like, if you want to argue with somebody, I'm just not the guy for that, But sometimes I will say something that is really intended to be charitable, and or praising something somebody else is doing in some other church or something like that. And people are like, aha, look, he's not really seriously Orthodox. Like, these are people outside of the Orthodox Church saying, he's not really seriously Orthodox. He's just like, there's a term going around right now, metagelical, just like, I don't even know what it means, but anyway, the point is they'll be like, this guy's not really Orthodox. And then if I say something that's a little exclusionary, something like, I do believe the Orthodox Church is the true church, I do believe that this is, everybody should be this, right? If I say something like that, they're like, oh, well, that's just his old fundamentalism coming through. He's not really Orthodox. His Orthodox people don't really believe that. And so it's like, well, if I'm too open, then it's not Orthodox. And if I'm closed, it's all, a little bit closed, it's also not Orthodox. And so the thing is that you can't let these people these people. You can't let the world, especially the world kind of outside of the church. It'd be like, it's like somebody outside of your family looking at you and saying, "You're not really married." My dad used to do this with me in a joking way. When I was, I got married when I was quite young. I was 20 years old when I got married. Which is a great decision. And obviously, we should say for the audience, we go to church together. We're the same parish.
Yes.
So you've seen my wife, you've seen my family, you've seen our lives together. So I'm very happily married. I love my wife. We got married when I was 20 years old and she was 24. And when I got married, my dad said, "Well, okay, enjoy it, but you're not a real adult yet." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, you're an adult once you've been married for 3 years." And I was like, okay, all right. So then I got to the 3-year period, and it's like, well, now it's like, you're not an adult yet. Okay, well, what do I need to do to really be an adult, Dad? It's like, well, you'll be an adult when you've had like 3 kids. And
So
at some point, like, it kept sort of moving up. So it was like 3 kids and a mortgage, and that was so now I have 6 kids and a mortgage. I'm a real grown up.
Yeah, you're really married.
Yeah, I'm real married. But obviously my dad was just messing with me. But if you sort of think about that question of like somebody being outside of your family and looking at you and being like, "Oh, you guys aren't really married yet," or something like that. Like, it's very weird. When the doubt comes from within yourself, I think it's again, you really have to think of this in terms of marriage. First of all, it's like, well, am I really married? Well, objectively, yes. Just objectively, yes, I'm married. But it's a good question to ask yourself something like, how well do I really know her? Right? How well do I really know her? And if you really, really love your spouse, then one of the manifestations that takes is that you know things about them. And how often a day? You've been married, what, how many years?
24 years.
24 years, right? This week, right?
No, it was in next March it'll be 24 years.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I couldn't. I felt like you had an anniversary recently, but I'm quite bad at these things. So in any case, right. So 24 years. I'm sure there are things that you do for your wife every day that you just do them. She didn't ask you to do it. You just think about it, and maybe neither one of you like really notices, because you're used to doing these things together, and you've been kind of pulling together in harmony for so long. You just do these things kind of naturally. And this is the same way with the church, is that at some point after you convert, I think it's really important actually for new converts to have a cooling off period before they feel like they should. I just stopped writing for about 3 years after I converted. It's important to have a little bit of a cooling off period before you try to put yourself out there and speak with a voice as though you're speaking on behalf of the church or something like that. And artistically, maybe that's the case as well. I don't know. Like, I don't know that art is something that most people can just sort of turn off. I didn't deliberately stop writing, but it was like there was such a great change in my life after my conversion that for about 3 years I just didn't have anything to say. Like, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who I was anymore. In a good way. Like, it was amazing. It was we were coming out of a really difficult ministry situation, and my wife and I were incredibly burned out in a lot of respects, and so the church is picking up, and our spiritual father is picking up the pieces of our lives and kind of helping us put everything back together, and it's being rebuilt in this beautiful way. But in the midst of that, you just have nothing to say. You just don't have anything to say. So, but eventually you just have to, the self-doubt that you're talking about, that just sounds to me like some version of like the artistic, how do you say, like, imposter syndrome or whatever. It's like, am I good enough to make this? I sent off a thing this week that I had written for a publisher, and I finished writing it 6 weeks ago, and I've just been sitting on it. And the deadline gets farther and farther and farther behind. And I'm done with it. It's done and it's good. But I don't want to send it off because I'm like, I don't know if it's really good enough. Maybe I could tweak it a little bit. What are they going to think about me if they read it and they don't like it? And like all these different things. And I think that some of that, like, am I Orthodox enough to do this? It's a good question to ask in a certain sense. Like, I definitely think you know, if you're gonna do something like this, especially a film like El Tonto, if you're not, you know, a regular, like a faithful member of a parish, right? You should not tackle something like this. You know, but you know, barring that sort of thing, I think at some point you just have to kind of say, here's my heart, and I've been storing up in it certain treasures, and now it's kind of time to, at some point, it's time to share those things. You know, you know, Christ says, you know, the good man, you know, out of his goodness brings out treasures both old and new. And I think that for the those of us who are converts, as we're beginning this artistic journey, I keep almost saying autistic journey, which is a different different thing, maybe, but maybe. But as we're beginning this artistic journey, we have treasures, both old and new, right? Things from our life before we came into the church that have been kind of transformed by our experiences within the church. And then we also have new things that we've learned and new dimensions to our personhood that have been revealed to us, you know, in Christ. And so we've got to, you know, yeah, definitely sit on it a little bit, but then at some point you just have to say, it's time to try this. And usually if it's not really Orthodox, the people in your life will let you know. Like, and obviously with El Tonto, you guys were working very closely with the clergy in our diocese, and even within our, you know, within our national church. Yeah. Right. You're working very closely with the clergy to make the film. The film is, I mean, one of the things that I love about El Tonto is is that almost the entire film is just prayer. And I don't even mean that in an abstract, this movie is a prayer kind of a sense, although it is that. It is. But it's like very little of there's dialogue and key moments, but most of the film is actually the prayer of the Orthodox Church, right? Even you know, the I arise today, you know, was being the first line of St. Patrick's breastplate, which is not explained in the film. It's really just kind of an Easter egg, like if you know some things about that kind of thing. But the film is definitely, I mean, it's shot through with our musical tradition, our liturgical tradition. It's got this pulse to it. I think very often about prayer as a heartbeat, and the film has the same heartbeat, you know, as our prayer life. If that makes any kind of sense. It's a weird way to say that, I guess, but
no, for sure. And I think I had it early on, and I think I just let like my artistic subconscious just take over, because I knew, you know, the liturgical life of the church, and, you know, having sent it off to the Metropolitan, he read the script, you know, he gave a blessing on that. And so it was, after a while, that all went away completely.
Yeah.
And it was more about, because I was Orthodox when I made my first feature film, This World Won't Break. And really, I set out to make art or films because it's something I want to see and it's not out there.
Yep.
You know, This World Won't Break was about a 40-year-old artist who doesn't make it. You know, that's not a film that's out there. And so with El Tonto Por Cristo, it was, I wanted to see a European cinematic black and white film that entertained me and also left me with thought. And so I think that all took over, and I was able to just dive into it and not even, you know, look back until it felt like a dream after it was all over, because it was just so all encompassing, 24 hours a day, you know, making a film.
So we're both Texas boys.
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew all up over the South. My dad was a traveling evangelist, so we didn't really have. I didn't have a home. We just, you know, whenever I got the chicken pox, it was in some old lady's house in Mississippi, or, you know, those are like monuments or milestones in my life. And, you know, for me, it's like I'd already seen Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky just because of the Criterion Collection and film, but I didn't know that it was, you know,
Orthodox.
Yeah, grounded in Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was really important for El Tonto Por Cristo, was to make it feel like that to the rest of the world, right?
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
It's inviting, it's artistic. If you don't know much about Orthodoxy, just still grab a popcorn and, you know, buckle up. It's still the same. There's no exclusion, you know. I think sometimes that's the thing in past Christian art or Christian films, it's very exclusive. And I still wanted it, like you said, the Easter eggs. That's the most important thing to me, because you can watch the film and not know. I just watched it with my family, my mom's side of the family, and they're not Orthodox at all, and they loved the movie. And my other brother, he's inquiring about Orthodoxy, he was finding Easter eggs, and so that was really important to me, for sure.
What did you mean by? Somehow I'm conducting the interview now, but this is actually something I wanted to ask. What did you mean by exclusive or inclusive? Like, could you, the terminology, like in terms of, because you said something like Christian films are usually very exclusive. Does you just mean by that, you know, if you're not inside the in group, you're not going to enjoy this?
I think it's more. Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word propaganda.
But
But it is a little bit. You know, we have to force the Jesus prayer here, and there has to be a moment where someone gets baptized, and it's not a film where you're letting the audience participate. You're telling the audience what the agenda is, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, a classic example is like the Kirk camera Left Behind. You 100%. Know, like at some point, you know, somebody does the Ray Comfort. Have you ever lied? Well, then you're a liar. Where do liars go? Liars go to hell. Congratulations, you're going to hell. Now here's a prayer you could say, and then you won't go to hell anymore, right? Just like that sort of a thing. I remember when that came out, when I'm a little younger than you, but so I was like probably a teenager when that movie came out, something like that, and it you know, I remember people in my church talking about it, because you know, everybody was really happy. It's like, oh, finally there's a movie with a real gospel presentation in it. You know, think of all the millions of people that are going to be saved because they're going to watch this movie and they're going to say that prayer along with him, and then they'll become Christians.
Yeah.
As though becoming a Christian is something you do in a movie theater and doesn't have anything to do with the context of like a communal life of any kind. But in any case, like that's so to me, like whenever I think of, like, usually when I would think of Christian films or Christian art, that it's always that kind of thing, you know, and that's the thing that I've been kind of working against, you know, myself, in terms of the things that I make, you know, are as far as like the stories that I tell, and you know, the games I publish and things like that. You know, it's not explicitly, you know, it's not explicitly Christian in the sense that you know, in that kind of a way. And the thing that you've done with El Tonto is that you did make an explicitly Christian film.
Yeah.
Right. But also, it's not like that. And I think it's because of what you just said, that it allows the viewer. I think there's even something about the cinematography that is kind of like this, in the way that I don't know terminology, you know, around cinematography, but everything is very open frame, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we do. It's a lot of these are they're called oneers. They're one takes, and we don't cut away or cut in. And so sometimes it can make some audience squirm a little bit, because they're used to a fast 2-3 second Mission Impossible cut, you know. Just a conversation, it's cut back and forth. And this, we push in, or we pull out, and you're experiencing almost like it's in real time, like real life. And that's like a European cinema style. Bresson and Bergman, Tarkovsky, you know, there's a film, Nostalgia, where a man literally walks back and forth in a pool trying to make sure a candle doesn't blow out in real time.
Yeah.
And it can seem, or it sound pretentious, but when you watch it, you know, I bawled when I was watching this. And there's just something allowing you, like I said, to participate. And so you were one of the first people to actually get a sneak peek of the film, and then you and Jonathan recently got another private screening, which is really, really fun. And, something that struck me about, your response, I just feel like, you didn't just see the film, you saw through the film. And I was curious, and you don't have to speak for Jonathan, but just what made you guys want to get involved in this film, El Tonto Por Cristo?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's first of all just a really beautiful film, and I think this is the thing is, if we're going to do art in an Orthodox way, it's got to be beautiful, which means that it doesn't mean it's always going to have $300 million production value or whatever. Although a lot of $300 million films are frankly garbage. Like, they don't look good.
Sure.
I'm not talking about the writing. I'm just talking about the fact that visually they're just not beautiful anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to make things as beautiful as we can. I think that's thing number one. I think that I've been kind of thinking, in advance of this interview, trying to think about what are the things about the film that I find the most compelling, and why did it move me so much? And I think one of the things that I think is really important about it is we're in this moment. So Archbishop Dmitri, right, who founded our cathedral community,
Mm-hmm.
He said famously that the first 1,000 years of the church was about trying to answer the question, all the heresies that are springing up the first 1,000 years of the church, trying to answer the question, who is God?
Mm.
And the second 1,000 years of the church, all the heresies that we were dealing with were trying to answer the question, what is the church? And so you have the Great Schism, the Protestant Reformation, and so on and so forth.
Mm.
But he said the next 1,000 years is going to be concerned with the question, what is man? What is a human being? And this is it's very obvious. You look around everything that's going on, and this is the big question right now. I'm not even talking about the really big social issues that we're dealing with right now in this country, though obviously that's part of it. Those things definitely stem from a warped anthropology. But now, when we're talking about transhumanism, AI, like all these different things, which you can tell. I mean, you mentioned Mission Impossible. That's literally what the last movie and the new movie, that's what they're about. I'm a big Mission Impossible fan, as a franchise. It's almost the only one that I care about. So I haven't seen the new movie yet, but
there's something about it. I'm a sucker for it.
Yeah, it's very joyful in a certain way, which I enjoy. But in any case, yeah. So, but the last Mission Impossible film, and one assumes the current one as well, are really kind of expressing our cultural anxiety around this. We're looking at whole industries about to just go away. If AI does all the things that people are promising it's going to be able to do, which I'm a little skeptical, but that's a different conversation, that there would be whole industries that would go away. And in the midst of all of this, one of the other things that AI is being used for now is to make art, or things passing as art, right? And so you can have AI write a script or write a screenplay. I still can't prove this, but I would bet cash money, Federal Reserve currency, that the Rings of Power first season was written almost entirely by AI, and then somebody just came by and doctored it later, because it does a lot of the things that I've seen AI writing do, where it'll say something, but it's just not quite right, and it really does feel like somebody took a Tolkien story and ran it through an AI, and then told the LLM to say, give me a script for another Tolkien story. Well, what's in a Tolkien story? There's trees and there's light and there's a sense of wonder. So here's a scene where they're talking about trees and light and a sense of wonder, but it's full of all kinds of things Tolkien just would simply never say. And they're not said well. It's just sort of saying, oh, these ingredients equals a Tolkien story. And I don't know if this is because they used an AI, or if because the people writing already have, who were writing the show, already have that machine mind. And this is what, as a friend of mine likes to say, shout out David if you're watching this, he's not worried about making computers that think like people. He's worried about making people that think like computers.
Yeah.
And this is especially, the things you have to do to get the outputs that you want from AI really forces you to start kind of thinking in this more computational way. And so all of this is kind of going on, and it is going to impact the filmmaking industry. It's going to impact everything. I mean, and so now there's actually this question of, well, what is the thing in art that AI can't reproduce? Theoretically, if you had a good enough language model, you could take all my writing, put it in there, and say, write a story in the style of Richard Rohlin, and it would produce it. And I'm sure that you saw the things from like the new Google visual stuff. I forget what it's called, that were making the rounds. If it's really that good, and again, I'm always a little skeptical because I've worked in the software world for years, and I have a nose for vaporware. And I think some of these things are not quite as good as but they could become so, because the whole thing has become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Everybody is saying AI is going to be this, so we may as well make it that. And so like everybody's, there's this push, and it's giving us this moment where we need to kind of be able to answer this question of, well, what about art, whether it's cinema or painting or writing or whatever else, like what about art is distinctly human? And this is where I think El Tonto is such an important film. It was one of the reasons I'm so determined to see it succeed, and get it in front of as many people as possible. Because the thing is that Orthodoxy does have a kind of transhumanism to it, or like a transhuman path. And usually when we talk about this in the context of monasticism, we call it the life of the angels. Right? And so the idea is that our monastics in their lives, they imitate the angels. And so they give up certain normal human things, like food and sleep and reproduction and all these different things, right? They give up certain normal human things to actually move on to this higher level of life. But then the paradox is that in doing this, they become the most authentically human people, who are then able to be a source and a conduit of grace to the rest of us. And this is the function of monasticism in our tradition. And so you've got this film that is set in this monastery in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I want to come back to the Texas thing. I brought it up a second ago for a reason. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. You get set at a monastery in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is actually not that unfeasible of a thing if you know anything about Orthodoxy in the South, Orthodoxy in Texas. We have a monastery in Kemp. Why not Corpus Christi, right? So it's not at all actually like unusual. And the people are, in the film are all a little weird. They're all a little off. They are, as I think Metropolitan Tikhon said, very much like, the people you would actually find in a monastery.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he confirmed this.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. It's not me, the lowly deacon saying that. I'm not taking shots at monastics. But they're a little everyone's a little strange. But then what's happening over the course of the film is you can see the process of giving up humanity, and even sometimes giving up art. The way that the character of Genesius, without spoiling too many things, but the way that character of Genesius is really struggling with having to have given up his particular art, when he enters the monastery, and then the way that it's sort of given back to him at the end of the film. And this particular idea, I think, leads to really, how to put this? I think the film really helps us actually sort out, like, what is the thing that's actually human about art, right? What's the thing that AI can never do?
Yes.
And I think the answer is sacrifice.
Right.
The answer is like prayer, sacrifice, worship, something like that. And when a work of art can become a prayer, I think about, times this has been done in great books. I'm just finishing taking a group right now through the book Loris by Eugene Vodoloskin, which is one of the great Orthodox books. It's just one of the best things anybody could read on the Middle Ages, actually. If you read this one and then a book by Sigrid Undset called Kirsten Lavransdatter, you read those two books, you will really know what the Middle Ages was like. But we're just finishing Loris, and Loris is another one of these amazing works of art, which I first read, by the way, before I was Orthodox, and I was like, how does this guy know all of this stuff? Because I'm a medievalist, and so I know some things about the Middle Ages, and I was like, well, how does this guy know all this stuff? Of course, I later, I hadn't heard of von Olaskin at that point. I just I read a review of the book, and I was like, that sounds interesting, so I picked it up.
Oh wow!
I mean, just imagine like reading that book with no context at all. Like you've never seen monasticism, you've never seen an Orthodox service, you have no idea what any of it is talking about. And so then later, when I came back to the book again as an Orthodox Christian, I was like, oh,
yeah.
But the thing is that it's not an exclusive book. It's full of all these things that are really interesting, on multiple levels. If you're a student of the Middle Ages, you're going to read the book a certain way. If you're an Orthodox Christian, you're going to read the book a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, if you're none of those things, the book is still a transformative experience.
Yeah.
And, there's no way you can't fake that. You just can't fake that. And that's what I think that you've done with El Tonto, is created something that is too authentic to be faked. And so anyway, I think it's this is what we need right now, which is a film that is going to that when people see it, again, talking about that sacramental imagination, right? Well, the monastic life is also a sacrament, right? It's also a mystery, right? It is a radical path of transformation for the human person, but also it's not just for monastics, because the monastic spirituality is the source, right? It's the headwaters of our whole spiritual life in the Orthodox Church, right? The daily prayers that I say every day were all written by and for monastics, right? The services that we serve in our temples, the repetition of the Jesus prayer, like all these different things come out of this, the great upswelling of monastic life in our church. And so what the film shows is the way that this life of prayer, like if your life can become like an icon, the way that it will actually transform the people around you. So anyway, I feel like I'm talking around it a lot because I don't want to give out too many specifics, but I think hopefully on your channel soon you'll start sharing some clips, and maybe people will get a better sense of some of the things that I'm talking about. I do want to ask you about the Texas thing though, before we run out of time.
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes. I did want to say, like, going back to the first thing of, like, me writing this and making it. It's a long process to make film. It's like one, because it has all the arts, right? It's writing, it's dance, it's photography, it's and it was more like, I need to make this now because there is something happening. There was something happening inside of me, like getting this thing out. And I think it's the timing too, because like Hollywood is starting to crumble. The cinema experience is changing, and it's almost like I've never really caught waves in life. I've always been a little bit back, and I do feel like with this film and people going back to the cinema, and that's why this is so important. I'll probably cut this part out, but because it's maybe dated, but we are doing a Kickstarter right now, and the reason it's so important to raise this Kickstarter money now is because we believe it belongs in theaters like paintings belong in galleries. Like, it needs to be looked at and pondered, and not just playing while you're making dinner. For the first go around, we're trying to make high-end a sacred cinema, and I think the best place to do that is in a theater experience, and then for people to like gather and talk about it. I mean, I love doing that with any kind of cinema. So I feel like you said, it's making high art, and it's the best. Like, you're trying to make the best. You're trying to make the highest art. But I think that we fell in a trap as Christian filmmakers of just cranking it out for the back end.
C.S. Lewis actually talks about this. He says something to the effect of, the trap for Christian creators is that they think, well, because the message is good, that I don't really have to worry if the execution is kind of half-baked.
100%.
Yeah, and that's that describes like most of the evangelical media of my childhood.
Because I felt like it's more of a stress on me because it is already there,
Right.
and so it's up to me to make it beautiful, right?
And so that's the Orthodox way, right? We
Yes.
say, well, the thing we're going to be doing in this building is the most important thing that any human beings have ever done, right? Which is to offer the sacrifice of thanksgiving to the God who made us. And therefore, this building needs to be the most beautiful place that we whatever the place is. Like if you only have a storefront to work with, you got to figure out, how do I make the storefront mission as beautiful as it could possibly be? If I get to build a cathedral, we got to figure out, how can I build a cathedral as beautiful as possible that will last as long as possible, right? But you're always thinking in this sort of maximalist way.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, go ahead and
Okay.
talk about the Texas thing as we wrap this thing up. And
yeah, so this is just something I've been wanting to ask you actually since This World Won't Break, which is something like, what is Texas? Like the El Tonto is a very Texas film. Like I feel that in my bones. Like having grown up, and obviously you shot a lot of it in down in the Gulf, but you also shot quite a bit of it in East Texas, which is where I'm from, and so like it does have this very kind of Texas feel, like down in my bones. But I would have a very hard time explaining why that is, because it's not like, I guess there are some Longhorn cattle in the film.
There is.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like it's not a movie about the rodeo or Whataburger. What was the movie that Vengeance? Novak's movie, which I thought was quite fun. But anyway, so like, what is you do this thing with two feature films now, where you sort of consciously set these films in Texas, in the South. What's the particular vibe, I guess?
Yeah, I think it goes back to
those things Texas.
Yeah, so the third one that I'm writing right now, it's kind of like a trilogy, but they're not connected in a way. I just think that Texas is as misrepresented when you see, even like when you watch shows like Landman and all these things. It's cliche, it's surface,
right?
And whenever people watch This World Won't Break, they always say, that's the Dallas, Texas, or Deep Ellum that I know.
Yeah.
And they're always like, what is it? I'm like, I don't know. What is it? I'm asking you, like, what is it? And with El Tonto, it was, all I know is Orthodox in Texas. I mean, I've traveled around, obviously, and been other places, but like the monastery in Kemp that at the time only had 2 nuns out there, and I would cut the grass and I would, do divine liturgy out there. And was normal for me. That was my orthodoxy. And so for me to go off and do a documentary on Russia, or that would take some time. I would definitely feel like imposter syndrome there. I think it's in my blood, and I think it's been so cliche and cheesy when they do, like, there is a rodeo scene in This World Won't Break, and it's the Mesquite Rodeo, but it feels so real because I grew up doing that. And
listen, I grew up going to the Mesquite Rodeo all the time.
Yeah.
Like, the smell of like the manure and the sawdust and all those things.
Yeah.
So I like, those are the very, I say all the time, like I probably went to the rodeo like 3 or 4 times as a kid.
Yeah.
But it's like going to a Rangers game. Like, this is what you do because this is where you live, kind of a thing. Yeah, no, it's just great. And I feel exactly what you're saying with like, I'm in Texas. I'm an Orthodox Christian. Now I'm a member of the clergy at the cathedral, trying to just do the services as beautifully as possible, receive the tradition that's been given to us. But then also, Orthodoxy in Texas has its own kind of a vibe, and sometimes that people from other places, that rubs them like the wrong way, or like a weird way or whatever. But I love it, and it's not just I'm not even talking about the way we do our services, which is just very traditional, but it's, just like like our Pascha parish picnic, right? You know, like
Yeah.
we do the pig roast, and we, you know, just like things that we do, our lives together, the way that we hang out when we're not in church. Like
Mhm.
it's a certain kind of a life, and it's very vibrant and beautiful, and there is a kind of a Texas edge to it, which I
Mhm.
have a hard time quantifying, but which you capture in the film. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was Robert Rodriguez. I wrote his book. It was called Rebel Without a Crew. And he basically said, write what you know and write what's around you as a up and coming filmmaker. So if your dad has a three-legged dog, you put it in the movie. If they have a liquor store that you can have access to, you know, for me there was the El Camino I had in this role on break, and I had access to the cathedral. I had access to the Kemp Monastery. I had access to a private primitive beach. And so I wrote all those things in, and it felt real and lived in. I really think that when you can write that way and you can deliver those things to your actors and to your talent and to the crew, it does become real. And there's a sense of, why does this feel like Texas? Because
yeah.
100% it is. I mean, down to the Topo Chicos, you know, that we had on set. It's just people are consuming it. It's in their blood at this point. You know, it's Texas.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, you know what? This was perfect timing. People that are listening, this will go out pretty soon, like in probably today or tomorrow. And so people can actually go to this Kickstarter and check it out. And they can be a part of it, just like we're a part of it, really. And that's really exciting to me, is people can put cinema that they want to watch into theater. So Seraphim, I thank you so much for hopping on this on Holy Full Films podcast #1.
I can't wait to come back for number 100.
Yeah, I'll write it down right now. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.